Let's be honest, most, if not all, famous duos have a main person and a sidekick. A number one and a number two. Batman and Robin, Mario and Luigi, Casey and JoJo. Some might not be obvious or even meant to be that way, but that's just how it is. Even just the order in which names are said or written can be enough to convey the hierarchy. But sometimes, if the sidekick really understands their role and embraces the spot they have been assigned, the story's enhanced because of it. I mean, what would Paul Simon be without Art Garfunkel? Okay, maybe that's a bad example, but you get the point. And maybe, just maybe, if everything goes just right, even the sidekick gets to have the spotlight for a minute at some point. Last week, Chris made the Pico entryway console, Paul Simon if you will, and we wanted to design a companion piece to go with it. Not necessarily meant to be a sidekick, but more an Art Garfunkel. Sure, both pieces could go solo, but honestly, we all know they're better together.
People hearing without listening.
So I came up with this one, which we're calling the Pico Wall Organizer. A simple piece that's meant to complement the entryway console, and we made full-length plans for both pieces, and they're available right now on our website. And yes, you can get them separately, but like I said, they're better as a duo. There's a link to these plans as well as all of our other pieces in the description, and we even have a sample chapter that you can view so you know exactly what you're getting. It might not be apparent so far, but the nice thing about this piece is that it doesn't require a lot of material. And honestly, if you plan it right, you could probably make the wall organizer from leftover material from the entryway table, or at least get pretty close. At this point, I have everything milled, and I'm making panels for the main section of the piece, which is made up of 3 sections of white oak. I did it like this to help with material efficiency, and it just made a little bit more sense from an assembly perspective. But for now, I could glue up the 3 panels. 2 of them were rectangle panels, and 1 of them was the longer angled panel. The 2 smaller panels were pretty straightforward, and the angled panel needed a bit of help to allow the glue up to go smoothly. Because of the angled edge, I needed to cut in some notches so that the clamps could pull straight across the glue seam. Chris is always giving me flack for how messy my assembly table gets, so I figured I'd use these Rockler glue mats to get them off my back. With the main sections of the panel all glued up, I then started to work on the walnut accent pieces. I needed to create a second angled panel, which was very similar to the oak section I just did, only this time it was a bit thinner walnut, and it was walnut, which is different than oak. I also needed a few strips of thinner walnut which would go on top of the center white oak section. These were milled down to match the center section white oak thickness, and both of them together would equal the thickness of the other 2 adjacent white oak panels. I know gluing 2 pieces of wood with perpendicular grain direction is going to be worrying to some people, but given the size of these pieces and how it all comes together in the finished piece, I'm really not concerned about having any issues in the long run. At this point, I had all of the main panel parts ready to go, and I could start getting everything glued up, which I did in 2 stages. I first needed to trim all the joint edges on each panel to make sure everything was square, and I had clean glue surfaces. I also trimmed the long angle panel to get it close to finished dimension, then cut in some more notches for this first glue up. Once the main panel had dried, I could trim the entire angle which followed the angled panel down through the other two panels, and with that cut, I could attach the walnut accent panel. With that, the main panel is completely assembled, and I could get to work on the shelves. I designed the piece to have 3 shelves, one along the top edge, and 2 lower shelves placed pretty arbitrarily on the left side of the main panel. So besides milling some walnut down to finished thickness, the only other thing I needed to think about was how wide to make each shelf, and I needed to factor in the joinery methods that I would be using for each shelf to determine the final width. So with that in mind, I could trim each one to its finished width. The top shelf also needed a bit more work beyond that, since I was going to be cutting an angle onto one end of this one. And I needed to make sure the angle was cut accurately so that it lined up with the top edge of the main panel. And sometimes with a cut like this, you have to make it in a couple passes to get it just right. No shame in that. So with all of the shelves done, I could get to work on the joinery for each one, and I started with the top shelf. I decided to connect this one with a butt joint that would be recessed into the upper edge of the main panel so that the shelf sat flush with that edge. This required removing a large section from the main panel, which I was able to do on the table saw and with a bit of chisel work to get it just right. I could then cut in some dominoes and glue the shelf into place. I just needed a couple clamping blocks to ensure I had parallel edges to pull everything together evenly. So now that I had the top shelf in place, I could get to work on the lower shelves, which would be attached with a tongue and groove type joint, as well as some screws from behind for a little extra strength. I could first start by placing and marking out where I wanted the grooves to be. Using those marks, I could set my router in place and measure the distance to the router base from the bottom of the upper shelf. With that measurement, I could cut a spacer piece of plywood which would reference the top shelf and create a straight edge to cut the grooves for both shelves. With both grooves cut, I just needed to cut the corresponding tenon onto the back edge of both shelves, and I could easily do this on the table saw. By removing slightly over a blade width from each side of each panel, I could sneak in on a good fit for the shelves, but as you can see here, the tenon hits the end of the groove. So I needed to trim the ends of the tenons to allow the left side of the shelves to slot over the ends of the grooves. With those fitting well, I could drill a few holes into each groove so that the shelves can be reinforced with screws once they're attached permanently. I wanted these holes to be as close to vertical as I could get, and I'm not great at the old freehand 90-degree drill, so I used this Rockler vertical drilling guide, which is great to have around for stuff like this. With the holes drilled, I could mark the screw locations on the back edge of the shelves, then take them to the drill press to drill the corresponding pilot holes, and from there I could temporarily put them into place. Having them screwed into place now allowed me to trim the other ends of the tenons. This isn't totally necessary, but I felt like leaving the tenons as is looked a little funny, and by funny I mean bad. So I marked the line where the edge of the main panel met the shelves, and I could then take them to the table saw and trim away the excess tenon to as close to the line as I could get. I could then reattach the shelves, and using a chisel, I could square up the last little bit of excess material. And actually, sorry to interrupt, but before we finish off these shelves, I want to take a second to thank Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. Both Chris and I have been using Squarespace to build and maintain our websites for years now, and honestly, it's one of the best choices we made when starting our businesses. At the time, I had no idea what I needed to do to build a website, but Squarespace makes it super easy to get up and running with plenty of professional looking templates to choose from, as well as making things like purchasing domains really simple. Squarespace also has plenty of e-commerce tools to help you grow your business, things like inventory management, a simple and secure checkout process, and unlimited products allow us to easily manage online transactions and not get bogged down with mundane tasks so we can devote more time to doing the things we enjoy, like making wall organizers. So if you're thinking about starting a website, or even if you already have one, go check out Squarespace to see if it might be a better option for you. Head over to squarespace.com/4eyes for a free trial. Then when you're ready to launch, use the offer code 4eyes to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. All right, thanks Squarespace. Let's get back to finishing off these shelves. Alright, the last thing I needed to make was the hooks that would be attached to the walnut corner panel. I actually went through a bunch of iterations of different hook designs, and even went as far as making 4 hooks of a different design, only to not like them and try something different.
I'm gonna throw these away.
Yeah. Oh, no.
I ended up with a simple design that I felt fit the aesthetic of the piece as a whole, and I came up with a simple sled that could make all the cuts for each hook perfectly repeatable and quick to do. The first setup would cut the upper edge of the hook. The second setup would use the first cut as a reference to then cut the bottom end of the hook. And the third setup would cut the second long edge, which is opposite from the reference I had jointed earlier. Doing it like this made it quick and easy, and allowed me to keep everything organized by cutting each hook completely from start to finish, instead of having to switch setups in between each cut. I also used a hold down for the last cut, which made it a lot safer, as there really wasn't space to hold the piece with my hands. At this point, everything had been fabricated, and it was really just a matter of some final sanding and getting everything assembled. The shelves were glued and screwed into place, this time with some longer screws, and the hooks were attached with some glue and screws as well, after I spaced them out to my liking. With the entire piece fully assembled, I could add some finish, then work on getting it hung on the wall. I made a simple French cleat using 1/2-inch thick plywood, then with a few simple measurements.
You could be a 1/2 inch off and I think you'll be okay.
It's gotta be perfect.
And after finding a few studs, stud finder, we could get it mounted to the wall. Seeing both pieces together was a nice way to finish this one off. So, if you dig the way they look and want to try your hand at building your own, check out the link to our plans in the description. And of course, thanks for watching.